If you're testing for accessibility in Figma and your accessibility testing doesn't look like this or sound like this,
Open a TD student line of credit you could get an Amazon.
Or you have annotations that don't look like this, then you are doing something wrong, and let's help you build the most accessible design possible. A big mistake that I see designers making is simply just testing their designs for wicked color contrast and calling it a day. So as long as their designs pass AA standards as they are right now, they assume that their design is completely accessible. That is absolutely the bare minimum of what you should be doing when you're testing for accessibility. Let's look at a quick example, and I know this is a little bit of a preamble, but say in the case of these graphs here, a designer might come in and use this contrast plugin and just click on one of these, say, okay, look, the color that we're using, so this purple, it passes the graphics level at the AA level. I'm going to assume that it's accessible. Same with the blue as well. At the graphics level, I'm going to assume that that's accessible. But this gray, maybe it doesn't pass AA accessibility level at the graphics level, so maybe I need to adjust the gray. A designer would go ahead, adjust the gray until it passes the AA level, and then ship that off to their developers and say, look, I've tested for color contrast. I know that my designs are completely accessible. But that is not the case. You need to take into consideration different levels of color blindness in order to truly know if your design is accessible. Now, this isn't an ad. It's a tool that I genuinely use all the time when I'm working with my design system clients, my product design clients. And it's a tool called Funkify that helps us simulate how those with different impairments are going to look at designs. So let's take a look at that next. So whenever I'm testing for accessibility, I actually always open up my Figma file inside a Chrome browser, because it allows me to use a specific tool to look at how those with different disabilities will interpret my design. So that tool is actually called Funkify. So let me go into my Chrome extensions here, all the Chrome extensions I use. But let's open up Funkify, and you can see it has all these different simulators, whether it's someone with blurry vision, someone with color disability, someone with dyslexia, someone with a trembling disability. So it'll allow you to go through and actually simulate how all these different personas would interpret your design. Now, I know that building a truly accessible product takes a ton of time and a ton of money. And if you're on a smaller design team, I understand that might not be possible. So what I always tell designers is start with your color. It's really the low-hanging fruit beyond just simply testing for WCAG AA. Now, one thing I'd like to add is we're not associated with this tool at all. We're not making any affiliate money by demoing this tool, really just doing it for the purposes of helping you become a better designer. So let me close Funkify for a sec. So just as a refresher, we have this graph here that we already looked at to recognize that these colors match WCAG AA. We also have this vendor breakdown graph with some overlapping elements. And we also have this line graph with just some very slightly different shades of purple. So let's go back into our Chrome extensions and use Funkify, and let's look at color. So Color Carl. So Color Carl allows us to look at our designs look at our designs if you have normal vision, if you're truly colorblind, so grayscale, or if you have, if you're weak at looking at green, or you have some red-green difficulties in seeing red-green. So I always tell designers, start with Color Carl and start with your normal vision, your grayscale, and your red-green disability, because those are the most common. So let's start off by looking at our grayscale and look at our graph here that we had already identified that matches or passes our WCAG AA standards. So let's switch on grayscale. What's one thing we notice? So our light gray stayed light gray, but our purple and our blue, whereas at normal vision, easy to tell the difference. At the grayscale level, now it looks like they're almost pretty much the same. So that's something we would need to take into consideration when we're designing things like graphs. Let's switch over to our vendor breakdown. All of a sudden, all of the colors at the normal vision level, where you can easily tell it's pink, it's blue, it's purple, they look exactly the same. So we would have absolutely no idea which is which. And if we switch over to our line graph, again, whereas at the normal vision level, it's difficult to tell the difference, but it's easy to tell the difference. At grayscale, I think that gets a little bit worse, where this color here and this color here are, again, almost a little bit too similar. Then if we switch over to our red-green, which is one of our other more common disabilities. So again, if you're just getting started with this, start with your normal vision, your grayscale, and your red-green disability. So at the red-green disability level, now this graph tends to look a little bit better, whereas our Purple is now sort of that darker shade of gray, so I can tell the difference between the blue and also that light gray. And if we switch over to our vendor breakdown, again, maybe these two colors look a little bit too similar. So we know that we need to make some adjustments there as well. So hopefully this is a really good example as to, although our designs might pass WCAG AA standards, for those who have different visual impairments, such as you're totally colorblind at the grayscale level, or you're weak in terms of your red-green, how you need to build a design that's truly accessible beyond just WCAG AA. Now, in terms of finding the colors that would fit, this can take days. That would work at the normal vision, the grayscale, the WCAG AA, and the red-green as well. So let's look at how we can do this by using textures within our designs. Okay, so if you don't want to have to go through all those different checks for normal vision, WCAG, grayscale, red-green disabilities, the easiest way to get around that, to ensure that your designs are accessible regardless of who's looking at it, is to use your textures. Now, the best way to demonstrate this is this line graph here. So you recall, we basically just have this line graph. Maybe if I just shrink this down just so we can see it all at once. There we go. So we have this line graph with 3 different shades of purple. They're slightly similar, but if you have normal vision, you're pretty easily able to tell that this one's lighter, this one's darker, and this one is the darkest. But you will call it grayscale is our second darkest, and our darkest looks pretty similar. The easiest way to get around this is to apply texture to these lines. So maybe we want to keep this light one solid. What we're then going to do is select this line here and set that to dashed. So now there's a texture to it. So now I'm easily able to tell the difference between this one and this one, because this one doesn't have a texture to it, but this one does. Now, with the third, we can simply make this one dashed again, and maybe set the dash level to 8, or maybe we'll up that a bit to something like 12. There we go. So now there's a pretty clear difference between the levels of dashes. The dashes at this top line are much smaller, a little bit less space between them, and the dashes at this bottom line are much larger and a little bit more space between them. So regardless if you're visually impaired or not, or what that level of visual impairment is, when you're looking at this graph, you're now easily able to tell the differences between the different lines. So using textures in your design is a great way to avoid having to test for all these different color impairments, whether it's grayscale, red-green disability, and also still ensuring that these pass your WCAG AA standards. Now, I know your graphs can be a little bit of a unique instance. If you're just getting started with accessibility testing, let's look at a much more simple example. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably saying, Kirk, I don't really work with graphs, so there's no reason for me to worry about this. You're wrong. Even something as simple as a text link can be interpreted differently based off your different level of disability. So let's, for the purpose of this exercise, we just have this basic paragraph here with a link learn more at the end, right? So let's go back into our Chrome extensions and pull up Funkify, and let's run grayscale. What's one thing that we notice? Whereas in normal vision, the red is clearly distinguishable. At grayscale, not so much. And it's not so bad at the red-green disability level, but it's still not as prominent. The easiest way to get around this is simply add an underline. So if I select the text, add an underline, then I go ahead, pull back up Funkify. Even at that grayscale level, where without that underline, it was really difficult to see that this was a link, with an underline, so adding that texture to the text allows us to better understand that this here is a link. So using Funkify and adding textures to your design is not simply just for graphs, it's for even most basic of elements, as these elements can be interpreted differently based on the different level of disability. Okay, so accessibility testing is not just looking at color contrast and how those with different color disabilities are interpreting your design. You also need to look at, what if they're blind? What if your user has no ability to see the colors at all? And how a Screenreader and navigating a website or application using the tab key will work on your website or your application. A great way to simulate this is just use any simple Screenreader plugin on Chrome. There's a ton of them that are out there, and I believe most laptops and Macs have them pre-built in as well. So we're just going to use the Screenreader on Chrome, just a simple Chrome plugin, and then switch over to a TD Canada Trust banking website in order to navigate that website using our tab key and how the screen reader interprets that website. Again, there's no way to do this on Figma yet, so I just use a Chrome extension. So let's go ahead and add this to Chrome and see how that screen reader reacts to the website. So let's go ahead, just add this extension.
Chrome and feedback is ready.
Now let's go ahead and navigate over to the TD Canada Trust website.
TD Canada Trust. Personal. Small business banking and investing. Tab.
Perfect. So notice right there is it already jumped into the personal small business commercial investing navigation, because those are the elements that a user is likely going to focus on to start. So it's reading me out those options right away. Now I'm going to start by using the tab key in order to navigate, because if you're totally visually impaired, you're blind, you're likely using your tab key in order to go through and have the screen reader read those data back to you.
Learn more about how to help avoid this interruption. Link.
Okay, so right there, we notice an issue is that it didn't actually tell me what the interruption was. So when pressing tab, it jumped right into that link.
Close.
Okay.
Button.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that for now. And now let's navigate through.
Skip to main content. Internal link.
So I don't know where main content will take me. We're going to skip that for now and then use, again, with the hands off of my trackpad, use the tab key.
List with 5 items. Personal. Link list item.
Let's navigate through.
Small business. Link list item. Commercial. Link list item. Investing. Link list item. About TD. Link list item.
Okay, so again, still those main elements that is taking us through.
List with 2 items list item. Select country Canada. Button collapsed.
Perfect. Now, this is a really good example because notice how it tells you to select the country and that it's currently set to Canada. See, these are things that you would need to work with your development team in order to call out so the screen reader would actually recognize what this button is for, but we'll get to that very shortly. Let's keep navigating through a couple more examples.
List item. Select language English. Button collapsed. TD Canada Trust. Link. Navigation list with 4 items. My accounts. Link list item.
All right, let's not keep navigating through here. Maybe we skip ahead.
Learn more. Button.
Perfect. So it's telling me what that item is and what I can also...
Open a TD student line of credit. You could get an Amazon.ca gift card worth up to $500. Conditions apply. Offer ends April 30th, 2025. Learn more Easy Web. Online banking Easy Web. Online banking login register security guarantee web broker online trading web broker online trading login register security guarantee.
Okay, so notice how it just threw all the data in this, all the text in this initial section at me. That's what's called a reading order. Now, in terms of a screen reader and working with your designs in order to make sure they're the most accessible as possible, is you actually need to define those. So what's the reading order that a screen reader will read your design in? And what's the tab order for someone navigating your website with the tab button? What are the elements that they're going to see first or navigate to first using tab? Now, in terms of making your design accessible, there's no way to test this on Figma yet. So it's really important to lay this out on your designs and call these out specifically for your developers so that your design, when actually coded out, is truly accessible. And let's take a look at some of those accessibility annotations next. Okay, let's look at some of the annotations that help us build an accessible design for a screen reader. Now, there's no way to test a screen reader in Figma yet. So that's why it's really important to use your annotations, work with your developers in order to do this right the first time. Now, all the annotations that we're going to be using are from this web accessibility annotation kit. I'll put a link for that in the description. And if you watched our developer handoff masterclass, some of these concepts might look pretty familiar for you already. Now, the first is our heading annotations. Now, I've gotten a lot of pushback from this one in the past from designers who didn't necessarily understand the reason why we need header annotations. Most just simply think that because there's a style applied that's maybe an H1, H2, or an H3, a developer is going to know which is which. They are, but a screen reader isn't going to necessarily know the difference. So let's look at an example as to what I mean by that. So let's say you have an H1 here that's 60, you have an H2 that's 48, and you have an H3 that's 36. If these were in a design, a screen reader would be licking its lips and sort of saying, this is a great way for me to read this design. I know what the different section breaks are, no concerns. But design is not always as fluid, where in a website, you don't always go from an H1 to an H2 to an H3, especially in modern design too, where we have ton of complex designs. You might go from an H1 and then beneath it, you might have an H3. But what's the issue with this approach? Is a screen reader is going to be looking for an H2. So despite the fact that you have an H3 here, in code, your developers will need to code this as an H2, so a screen reader is properly able to understand the layout and the order in which these things should be read, and helps just break out that overall section. So let's look at a real quick example as how we can apply our H tags onto a Figma design. So now if we have, just look at a real quick example here, what we have here is sort of this text here, hey Kirk, all is on track, which would be our H3 in this case, which is a 36. And then we also have this text here, which would be our H1. So our screen reader is instantly going to be looking for an H1. So what we would need to inform our developers in this case, that this here, sorry, I just absolutely position this, this here would be an H1, and then this here would be an H2. So a screen reader knows what to look for. So despite these maybe having their styles, this as an H3 and this as an H1, you really need to work with your development team and call out what is labeled what from the code side in order to help a screen reader properly interpret those designs. Okay, so next let's look at a reading order, and this is the order in which a screen reader would actually read our design. So it goes pretty hand in hand with our heading tags. And again, if you have any questions, just feel free to leave those comments or questions in the comments. So let's go into our web accessibility annotation kit and pull in our reading order. Now, maybe let's simply just go ahead and focus at this card and just sort of leave the stuff at the top. So what's the first element that we might want read? So personally, I think the name of the role that a user might be looking for is probably the most important. So we have one, because if we were to call this design, but the word is product designer. So if we were to set design as the first word that's read by the screen reader, but product designer is the title, you would already know that this is associated with the design category. So there's probably no need to have design be the first word that's read in the reading order. Maybe then we might go to design. So maybe we do want to read the tag, maybe the description, maybe the word is not as clear, where you don't necessarily know the category that it belongs to. Now, if you think about someone who just reads left to right, it would go design, apply now, and then product design. But we don't actually know the description of the role. We don't know what it's for. We don't know if it's full-time. What's the location? Is it remote? Do I have to be in office all the time? So this is where reading order is super important. So it allows you to specify the information that should be read before you get to the most common or the most actionable element, regardless of its position. So if product designer is the first thing that's read, maybe this is the second thing that's read. What we can also do here is we can add a quick reading order details and say, leave out the top tag design from being read by a screen reader. This would essentially be saying that we would no longer need this tag be read by screen reader because we already have this tag being read. So what's next that we would want read? So of course, the basic description. So we're looking for a mid-level product designer to join our team, learn more. I think that works. We can also go with remote. So where's the location of it? And is it full-time, part-time, contract? Maybe this is the fifth thing that's read. Fifth thing that's read. And then maybe last is that apply now. So now we know all the details of this specific role. But now that we know those details, we now have the ability to apply because we know a little bit more details. Instead of just going from a product designer to apply now, we're going from product designer as part of the design category, a little bit of a description. I now know that it's remote, whether it's full-time, part-time, contract. And now that I have those details, I can go ahead and apply now. So this is why it's so important to call out that reading order, because depending on the design, it's not always super obvious for a screen reader. And again, these are things in order to build an accessible product that would need to be coded in your design. So it's best with this to also work hand in hand with your developers. And let's go ahead and take a look at tab order next. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and look at tab order. Now, let's look at this section here to start. So if I hit tab, the first thing it does is it takes me to the Easy Web online banking login. If I hit tab again, it's going to take me to register, and then the security guarantee, and then get into the web broker online trading. If you don't call out the specific tab order, your developer might assume that the login for online banking is the first, of course, for the tab order, and then the web broker online trading as the second. But then it might jump into the register and the security guarantee, but then you no longer know what section it's for. Is the register that the tab is on for the web broker online trading, or is it for the online banking? That's why it's super important to call out the tab order for your developers in order for them to build the most accessible product. And using the design we just looked at, let's look at a quick example. Okay, so now that we have a good idea as to the importance of tab order, what our web accessibility annotation kit calls our focus order, let's look at a quick example. So let's go into our web accessibility annotation kit, pull in one of the focus order stamps. And now there are two main tab order CTAs within this widget here. We have learn more, and then we have apply now. So you might go through all of these details and then get asked to apply now or get asked to learn more. Personally, you might want to learn more before you apply now, because if the screen reader reads to you apply now first, you might automatically assume that that's the only CTA that's there. So you might just hit that and get asked to apply, get taken into that apply now flow without getting asked if you want to learn more first. So what I might want to do in this case then is set the learn more CTA, set that to right as the first order in the tab order, getting asked if I want to learn more about the role before I get into applying. Let's say I don't, and a product design role is exactly what I'm looking for, then I can go ahead and apply now. So this is basically saying that I get asked if I want to learn more about the role first before getting asked if I want to apply. And if I don't want to learn more because this role is what I'm looking for, I can then go ahead and apply now. So again, another small but a great example as to why tab order and calling these out in your Figma designs is so important in building the most accessible product. Lastly, let's go ahead and let's look at landmarks. Now, if you rewind back to when we were using our screen reader, the TD website asked if we wanted to skip to the main section. And that is what's called a landmark. Now, a really great example of this is a recipe page. If you've ever baked something in the past, ever cooked a recipe, you'll know that there's about 10 paragraphs of history of the recipe, how they came up with the idea, maybe it was their great-grandparents' recipe, and the story of how they immigrated from Italy over to Canada or the United States. And then at the very bottom, you get into the actual recipe and the ingredients themselves. And you can imagine how frustrating it would be if you're on a screen reader to have to go through and listen to an entire story about the history of the recipe before actually getting to the heart of the action, which is the ingredients and the recipe instructions. So the recipe and ingredients is what's called a landmark. So this sort of helps those in a screen reader jump to the most important sections of whatever it is that they're looking at. So in the case of that TD website, it was that main content. So what we can do is go into our web accessibility annotation kit and pull in the landmark stamp. And again, it's best to communicate with your developers exactly what these are for so that they can build the most accessible product. So maybe right here is our first landmark. So let's pull in our landmark details, and we're going to call this just a section for now. And again, best to build these out with your developers so you can align on naming. And using our landmark details, let's go ahead and also add a role for it as well. Now, in terms of the difference between the accessible name and the role, the accessible name is really just the name of this section overall, but the role is more of a description and the point it plays than anything else. And again, these are also things that are read by a screen reader in your application or in your website. So let's go ahead and set this to our first landmark item. So let's add the accessible name here to recipe. Recipe, the role of this is contains the ingredients and instructions. Something like that. Again, it might be a bad example, but it's best to work with also copy designer as well on things like this. So what's the second element here in our landmark? So we have our equipment. Maybe there might not be any equipment. So maybe let's jump right to the ingredients. So let's go ahead and switch that to the left. And then this is our second landmark that's able to be called upon by a Screenreader, which in this case would be those ingredients. So let's set that to our ingredients. Accessible name in this case would be ingredients. The role, all the ingredients needed to cook this recipe. And now lastly, the third is the instructions. So let's copy this, bring this down, and then here is the instructions. It's 3, and then 3. This here is our instructions. Role, instructions on how to cook the recipe. Perfect. So now for those who are impaired and are on a screen reader, they now no longer need to go through, several paragraphs, taking a minute, 2 minutes, explaining, top tips with the recipe, history of the recipe, and just about everything else. Now they have the ability to jump right to the elements that are most important for them.